Everything happened somewhere. Today, at a tomb.
In the first century, for a believing community, the most expensive thing that they could own were Torah scrolls in the synagogue. To get a Torah scroll, that's the most expensive. But it was worth it because it was God's very words. The most expensive thing a family could own is a tomb. Most expensive, by far. Now, a tomb, because it's a sarcophagus, would be dug, and it could only be dug so big. They're not endless based upon, because they're already in a worn-out quarry, they could only be as much as the stone would support it. So you would dig a tomb, and then your family gets larger and larger, and there's grandma and grandpa, and there's aunts and uncles, and cousins, and nieces and nephews. But apparently in Joseph of Arimathea, his family is so large, and Joseph of Arimathea had the means that he could afford a new tomb. So he starts a new tomb, a brand new tomb. No one else is buried in it. In fact, in Judaism, because of their laws of kosher, you don't put two unlike things together. You don't eat meat and milk together. You don't wear cotton and linen together. You separate these things because you're trying to understand the difference between the holy and the common, the clean and the unclean. Okay? God's people are to be holy as He's holy, so they have to be separate. Okay? So when it comes to tombs, I have a tomb for my family, you have a tomb for your family, and for me to be buried with my fathers is not to be buried in your tomb. For you to be buried with your fathers is not to be buried in my tomb. Okay? So Joseph of Arimathea gives to Jesus what some argue is the most expensive gift he could possibly give to him, his tomb. And by tradition or by culture, and as they understand Torah, then Joseph of Arimathea will have to find a new tomb because he can't be buried with Christ. It's an amazing gift that Joseph of Arimathea gave. But let me give you something different, because I think there's something different going on. Let me tell you a story. In the Bible, in the book of Kings, 1 Kings, there's a story of a young prophet from Judah, of all places. And he is to go up to the north, and he's to speak to the king who has built an altar, and God doesn't want that altar. So this young prophet is to go up and tell the king, don't build this altar. God tells you not to build this altar. The king hears the prophet and says to the prophet, listen, why don't you stay at my place and let's have supper together? No, said the young prophet to the king. I am not to have supper. The Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, the Lord told me not to eat. Eating is relationship. Not to eat with you. So the young prophet got on his donkey and began to ride back to Judah. And as he's going back to Judah, an old prophet comes to him. And the old prophet says to the young prophet, my son, come to my house to eat. Come to my house to eat. And the young prophet says to the old prophet, oh, my friend, I can't, because the Lord told me not to eat. I can't eat with you. Oh, says the old prophet, the Lord came to me and told me, it's okay. You can come to my house to eat. So the young prophet says, okay, he's hungry. Apparently the old prophet, and so the young prophet goes to the old prophet's house and they eat together. The young prophet gets on his donkey and is about to go home when a lion comes out. Interesting animal. Lion of Judah. It's interesting. A lion comes out and the lion attacks and mauls him. Passers-by see this and they tell the old prophet what had happened. The old prophet couldn't believe it. He's heartbroken. He goes and saddles up his donkey, rides out to where the young prophet is, only to see the donkey and the lion standing side by side, and the young prophet dead but not mauled on the ground. This clearly is judgment. The old prophet takes the young prophet lovingly, puts him on his donkey, brings him to his house, washes him, prepares his body, and puts that young prophet into his tomb. So the old prophet takes him home, washes him, prepares him, and then verse 31 of 1 Kings chapter 13. Verse 31 of 1 Kings 13. After burying him, the old prophet said to his sons, "When I die, bury me in the grave where the man of God is buried. Lay my bones beside his bones, bone to bone." For the message he declared by the word of the Lord against the altar in Bethel and against all the shrines on the high places in the towns of Samaria will certainly come true. So what this prophet said is, bury my bones next to his bones. When I read that, I talked to a couple of my Jewish friends, and I said, listen, doesn't that violate the laws of kosher? I said, what did the rabbis say to it? And I said to him, but this is what I think what's going on, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong. I said, did that old prophet want the righteousness of the young prophet, and that's why he wanted his bones to bone? And they said, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Bone to bone. Where the old prophet wanted the righteousness of this prophet, this young prophet of Judah, who was betrayed, who was lied to, who was serving God, and in the service of God was denied, betrayed, abandoned, and died. And the old prophet says, bury me next to him. Could it be that Joseph of Arimathea wanted to be buried bone to Jesus? This bone to bone thing, it's strong. Listen, this is going to come at you from left field. But here it comes. Do you remember the prophet Elijah? Elijah the prophet had a prophet who he raised up called Elisha. Now Elijah and Elisha, the time comes for Elijah to be taken up to God with the fiery chariot. Okay? As they're going to the place where Elijah's to be taken up, there's a brook that they have to cross. So Elijah takes his mantle, puts it on the brook, it dries, they pass by. And Elijah is about to be taken up. Elijah says, what would you like, my son? And Elisha said, I would like a double portion. I like what you have, only double it. And Elijah basically said, well, the Lord will provide. And he hands to Elisha his mantle, his sign of authority, his clothes. And Elijah disappears in the chariot of fire. Now, Elijah did 7 miracles, and Elisha wanted a double portion. So Elisha comes to that same brook, and here it is. What's going to happen? Did I receive or did I not? So he takes his mantle off, puts it in the brook. He received, and he walks across, taking up his mantle. Now, how many miracles do you think Elisha performed? 13. He did 13. He did 13 and then he died. But then you come to 2 Kings chapter 13. And in 2 Kings chapter 13, you read this story. Elisha died and was buried. Now, Moabite raiders used to enter the country every spring. Once, while some Israelites were burying a man, suddenly they saw a band of raiders, so they threw the man's body into Elisha's tomb. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the man came to life and stood up on his feet. Number 14. 2 Kings 13, verses 20 to 21. Bone to bone. That old prophet wanted to be buried bone to bone because he wanted the righteousness of the young prophet. And then there's Elisha. And when you touch his bones, your bones come alive. We study, as we should, the passion of Christ. There is no event more pivotal in our faith walk than the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. But you need to understand, he was in the tomb for 3 days. Chances are you and I will be in tombs. But when they place us there, if Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior, you are bone to bone with the righteousness of Christ. And trust me on this, you are more alive at that time than any time. I tell my people at Holland Heights Church when we have a funeral and the casket's in front of me, I tell my people the person who's the most alive in this room is the person in that box. Because they're with their Lord. Now, for us, you got to have faith to believe that one. But faith is sure of what you hope for, certain of what you do not see. Bone to bone. Only Jesus changes the tomb into a womb. And the life that is birthed there is a life covered with the righteousness of Christ. And the life that is birthed there is of a quality and a quantity that is never ending. And all it does is bring a smile to God. If I could describe the life that is birthed out of the tomb of Christ, I would describe it with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. You got to hear that, Israel. You got to hear that, God strugglers. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Bone to bone. Righteousness of Christ.